only way they can take this election away from us is if this is a rigged election. Be very, very careful. This is going to be, and I really believe this is the most important election in the history of our country.
It is.
Don't let them take it away from you.
The economy is on the ballot. Law and order is on the ballot. Our most cherished ideals of freedom and free markets are on the ballot. That's why we need 4 more years of President Donald Trump in the White House.
Under the banner of the Great American Comeback, the Republican National Convention kicked off with unflinching support for its candidate, President Trump, while prominent Republicans defect to the Democratic camp. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Ghida Fakhry. The Republican National Convention, which kicked off in Charlotte, North Carolina on Monday, officially nominated President Trump for a second 4-year term. With a lineup of speakers setting the tone of the convention, 6 out of 12 key speakers are Trump family members. Also speaking at the convention are a couple charged last month for pointing their firearms at peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters in St. Louis, Missouri. In breach of convention protocol, President Trump will speak on each day of the convention and will give his acceptance speech from the White House, a decision that was criticized by Democrats for ethical concerns over the use of federal property for electoral purposes. In another break with tradition, the Republican convention will not adopt a new platform. Instead, it released a statement merely reasserting the party's strong support for President Donald Trump and his administration. So has the Republican Party become the party of Trump? And can it convince Americans to re-elect the president? I'm joined by former Republican Senator Jim DeMint of South Carolina, a largely conservative state won by Trump in 2016. Senator DeMint, for the first time in the history of any major party in the United States, no new platform is being adopted at the Republican convention. What does this tell us about the state of the Republican Party under President Trump, other than that it is completely beholden to one man rather than one set of policies and principles?
Well, there was no need to change the platform. There's broad agreement across the Republican Party, and I think across the country as a whole, Ghida, and the party is not beholden to one man. What we've seen is Trump has been very faithful to the ideas of the Republican platform, and so there's no need to change it, but that's why he has broad support within the party.
Well, you say there's no need to change it, but if a party is without a new platform, what does it actually stand for? Isn't it an admission that the party has no policy goals and has made no progress on specific issues over the last 4 years?
No, the policies are principles that we believe in, American principles, the things that we know that worked. And the fact that we haven't changed it suggests that Trump is not driving our party, that the party and the platform and the principles, which we think are very consistent with the American founding principles, have stayed consistent. And that's the whole idea of conservatism, is to continue to build on those ideas that work. Trump has laid out his second-term policies. We heard that on Monday night as a lot of the different speakers came out. He told us last week what his second term would be about. So he is continuing those goals. And that's what we've seen this week with the Republican convention, is all about America, what works, why people love America. And it's a contrast between what we heard from the Democrats, who are apologizing for America and calling it racist. And it's
well, hold on, Senator, because many people watching the Republican National Convention would actually say it's all about Trump. It's not about the party. Even some conservative Republican commentators like Bill Kristol and others are saying this is no longer the Republican Party. It's a Trump cult. Isn't this what the party's become?
Absolutely not. And Bill Kristol is no longer a Republican, unfortunately. Anyone who listened to speeches like from Senator Tim Scott from my state, it was not all about Trump. It was about America. The people who've been speaking at this convention are talking about America and how Trump is helping to advance those principles that help every American. And if people, unfortunately, Ghida, you had to go to C-SPAN to really see the convention, because if you went to the major networks, all you heard was the talking heads talking over great speeches like we heard from Tim Scott.
Well, the major networks actually did carry the speeches in full. But as a former lawmaker, do you really buy that this election is a choice between Trump and chaos, a takeover by anarchists and radical socialists, as we've been hearing repeatedly during this convention? Because we did hear a lot of angry speeches from Trump supporters. We heard the president and others use fear and nativism to scare away voters, saying the Democrats will steal this election, that they will take away freedoms, essentially talking about vengeful mobs and the radical left set out to destroying America.
Ghida,
do you buy this?
I don't have to buy it. It's a fact. The cities that the Democrats are running are now in chaos, and they seem to want to foment more chaos to create insecurity and fear in the country. The Republicans are doing the exact opposite of talking about.
Well, this is under the watch of President Trump. This is not under a future Biden administration. It's happening in today's America under President Trump.
In our country, we are a republic. It's controlled by different governors and mayors, and Trump does not have the authority to stop all of this that's going on, even though in certain crises he may need to because of the out of control situation. But you've hit the point that Democrats are trying to do. They are trying to create chaos and blame it on Trump. They're trying to blame the coronavirus on Trump. But the fact is that what we've seen from Trump in his first 4 years are policies that help every American and have moved our country forward. And it's a clear contrast. You've got an anti-American party right now, and the Republican Party with Trump at its head is moving this country ahead with a positive vision.
Well, clearly a majority of Americans, though, Senator, aren't buying it. Polls out this week show that Trump's approval rating is at 35%. 68% disapprove of his handling of the pandemic, and some 52% disapprove of his handling of the economy. And there were also plenty of grievances and scapegoating, whether it's blaming China for the pandemic or the so-called deep state for everything else during this national convention.
These polls, I know how they're done because I've done a whole lot of market research myself. We're seeing the polls in the battleground states move towards Trump as people see the result of Democrat management of states and cities all over the country. Sure, the Democrats have taken a hit against Trump, trying to impeach him and blame him up for just about anything. He's been the most maligned and lied about political figure I've ever known. But you'll see over the next couple of months, Americans are going to pay more attention. They're going to see that what Trump has done in his first 4 years is what they want to continue. And the chaos that's created by the Democrats, the Americans are not going to vote for it. I can tell you that for sure.
Well, you say the Americans aren't going to vote for it, but can you win this election if the president keeps appealing to just one constituency, if he keeps embracing the more radical fringe elements of the Republican base, including the QAnon conspiracy theorists who believe in many outlandish things, including that the president is fighting a deep state of satanic pedophiles and cannibals who are plotting against him? Can you win by appealing simply to these groups of people?
I don't believe you've been watching the convention, because we've had African-American legislators from Georgia, immigrants from all over the world talking about what this country has done from them, young ethnic women who started businesses, police and other folks who've talked about, nurses talked about how much important Trump's actions have been to save people from coronavirus. Over the next couple of months, you're going to see more of the truth come out as more and more constituents are going to get behind Trump because they see what the leadership of Biden has done over 47 years.
Former Senator DeMint, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, more than 70 Republican national security officials and former members of Congress issued a statement urging voters to support the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, and accusing President Trump of undermining the rule of law. With a growing number of Republicans crossing party lines, is the future of the grand old party, the GOP, on the line. On the day the RNC kicked off, over 24 former Republican lawmakers formed a group known as Republicans for Biden, including former Arizona Congressman Jim Colby, who joins me now. Congressman Colby, you spent 22 years representing Arizona in Congress as a Republican before deciding to leave the party. You did not endorse Donald Trump in the last election, and now you've thrown your weight and your support behind the Democratic candidate for president. What made you decide to go against the leader of your own party?
Well, I can tell you, Ghida, it's not easy to make that decision after more than 50 years of having been a Republican. And I have not voted for a Democrat for president before this time. As you said, in 2016, I didn't vote for Trump, but I didn't also vote for Hillary Clinton. But I just think, I guess I hoped maybe in 2016 that he'd grow into the job and he'd do better once he was in office, surround himself with the right people, have the right demeanor, but he hasn't. He's only gotten worse since he's been in office. And I just think that the coarseness of this individual and the lack of civility, his lack of empathy, his unwillingness to listen to other people, to scientific evidence when it comes to the pandemic, his pathological desire to tell falsehoods, more than 20,000 of them documented to this date, just suggests to me that we really need to have a new person.
A new person, Congressman, but is this a repudiation of Trump, or is it also a rebuke of the Republican Party, which has largely stood by him, if not enabled him, for the past 4 years?
The Republican Party did enable him, but now it is a totally owned subsidiary of the Trump organization. So I don't know whether if Trump loses, whether we'll return to a different era or not. But I hope that the Republican Party can regain its footing and believe in the things that I've always believed in: balanced budgets and fiscal responsibility, open trade and markets, a strong position in the world, allowing for immigration of good immigrants into our country. These are the things that have been the principles of the Republican Party that have been completely abandoned by them now. So that's why I'm not a Republican.
That's why you're not a Republican, but many are still standing firmly behind him. Are you surprised by this support that continues within the Republican Party for President Trump?
No, I think I understand there is an element in our country today that he appeals to. And some of them are Republicans, but many of them are former Democrats, working class Democrats. He appeals to people who feel disaffected, that they are not getting what they should get out of society today. He appeals to that, but he appeals to them in the worst possible way, not in a way that appeals to their better natures, but to their worse natures.
Well, you signed a letter along with over a dozen other Republicans, several dozens, in fact, which reads in part, and I quote, Congressman, "While some of us hold policy positions that differ from those of Joe Biden and his party, the time to debate those policy differences will come later. For now, it is imperative that we stop Trump's assault on our nation's values and institutions and reinstate the moral foundations of our democracy." Now, when you look at the way the party has shifted over the last couple of decades, from the party of Reagan to the party of Trump, how would you describe it today? Many believe it's become a far-right party. Do you agree? What does the party represent today?
No, I don't.
Who does it represent?
It's not really far right. I mean, there are elements in there that are certainly very, very far right. But it isn't that it's just far right. It's become a cult of an individual, of Trump, who personifies me. And he's not about the country. He's not about bringing people together. It's totally transactional, everything that Trump does. One day, certainly it's not conservative. It's not far right to be spending trillions of dollars. It's not far right to be against trading arrangements. These are things that don't fit in with the very basic principles that the Republican Party has been built on for a century.
You say it's not far right, but how concerned are you about the president's embrace of groups such as QAnon, a fringe group of conspiracy theorists, which has millions of followers and which the FBI itself, as you know, has identified as a domestic terrorism threat? We spoke with a political scientist who specializes in the study of conspiracy theories, and here's what he told us.
So the QAnon group hasn't become more popular, but they are emboldened, and this is largely because of President Trump's endorsements over the last 2 years. This is normal for Trump. He spent the last 5 years building support among conspiracy theorists. This is a big part of his coalition. So it makes sense for him to retweet QAnon tweets and to talk highly of this group. And he does it because this is part of his electoral base.
Orzynski believes QAnon followers make up 5 to 6% of the population. Has the president sometimes tacit and quite often explicit endorsements of the group's followers, including likely future members of Congress, changed the party and its values?
The QAnon is an appalling thing. I mean, it's astonishing that anybody believes it. But as you pointed out, there's always about a 5% of disaffected people that are going to believe that kind of thing. But for the president of the United States to be endorsing that is just unacceptable. But let me point out that these kinds of conspiracy theories and theorists have been in parties, Republican and Democrat, in the past, going way back to the time of the early 1800s there. This is not something that's new. What's new is, of course, the social media, which spreads these concepts and ideas so rapidly.
And where does it leave other moderate Republican voters within the party? Your state, Arizona, is traditionally a solid red state, but it could become a pivotal battleground state in 2020. It voted for the Republican nominee in almost every presidential election, except, I believe, in '96 for Bill Clinton and back in '48 for Harry Truman. Will it be different this time, though?
I think it's going to be extremely close. I mean, there's still a very substantial number of people, Republicans and Democrats, who support Trump. You certainly go out into the rural areas, and there's very strong support for him there. But Arizona is becoming much more of a suburban state. The communities surrounding Phoenix, which is the 5th largest metropolitan area in the United States, the communities surrounding that are very suburban in their outlook. And so these people are not necessarily going to be Trump supporters. So the demographics of Arizona clearly are changing. And whether it'll be enough this year to shift it to Biden, I don't know. But I'm hoping that people like myself and Jeff Flake and others coming out and speaking out as we are might convince some people that this is the way to go this year.
Congressman Jim Colby, thanks very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Ahead of the Republican convention, the influential Washington Post published a rare full-page editorial warning that, quote, a second Trump term might injure the Democratic experiment beyond recovery, end quote. The Post said it will, in the coming weeks, do something it's never done before: publish a series of editorials on the damage the president has caused and the danger he would pose in a second term. So has the president undermined confidence in American democracy? I'm joined by Governor Christine Whitman, a lifelong Republican and former New Jersey governor. She was one of several Republicans who spoke at the Democratic National Convention last week. Governor Whitman, you opposed Donald Trump from the very beginning. In 2016, you supported Hillary Clinton, this time Joe Biden. Why do you, as a Republican, believe that Democrats are better suited to become president of the United States?
Well, because I've had to deal with Donald Trump. I dealt with him as a governor, and I knew how he behaved, particularly in Atlantic City with his casinos. I knew what his background was, and I did not think at any point that he was fit to be president of the United States. And nothing he has done since taking office, his disregard for the Constitution, the rule of law, demeaning people, nothing that he's done has changed my opinion.
His followers and his supporters will say that he's achieved quite a bit since he's been in office. You clearly disagree.
Well, I don't see it. I mean, what he's achieved is driving division, stirring up hatred, racial hatreds. He claims credit for the economy, and that's fair enough, because whoever's in charge at the time, things go well, will get it, or when they go bad, they'll get that blame too, even if they didn't start it, which he didn't. It started under Obama. But I will absolutely argue that had he taken this virus sooner, the coronavirus, that we would be well on our way to rebuilding our economy, or at least much further down the line than we are today. But because he didn't, there was no single message from Washington that states had to do it on their own, and municipalities, and people didn't take it seriously. It's going to be much harder to restart the economy with these stutter starts.
But if that is the case, why aren't more Republicans willing to stand up to him? You recently wrote a blog urging other Republicans, quote, to stand up to this man and this administration. Why aren't they?
Well, I think you'll see more and more Republicans joining forces saying, no, it's time to put our country ahead of the party. And you'll see more of that. But it's been hard for those who are in office because he wields such a big stick with the way finances work in this country and his ability to control the funding for races, and the fact that his base, which is shrinking, because if you look at how registrations are going, more people are joining the independent column than the Republican column. That is shrinking, but his base is absolutely loyal and they vote. And the trouble with it is that, and that's how we got where we are today, not enough people were taking the time to vote in primaries or general elections.
And he is still wildly popular with the base and with Republican voters. In fact, I believe he has an approval rating of 79% among Republicans. Now, you warned about what you argued were the dangers of electing President Trump long before many other Republicans began to speak out, saying, in fact, a month before the last election, quote, that far too many have failed to recognize that there is a difference between change and chaos. The latter is what we will get with a Trump presidency. You still believe that today?
I do, absolutely. And I'm even more concerned that in this election, should he lose, if it isn't by a huge margin, he's going to turn this country upside down. He's already said that should he lose, it was because the election was rigged. Just no proof to that. That mail-in voting is all fraud, no proof to that behind that. It's going to be, he's going to fight it. He's going to fight a losing election should he lose it. And that is a scary thought.
But what do you say to many Republicans who still believe that a Biden administration would bring back what they say are many of the Obama failed policies?
Well, I would say watch Joe Biden's speech, acceptance speech at the Democrat convention. That gives you the measure of the man. That tells you who he is. And then look at his record, which has been about building coalitions, working with both sides of the aisle. That shows it's not someone who's going to go hard left. And it's not someone who's going to be pushed around by anybody else. He is who he is. He's a decent man. He is a strong man, and he's a stable person, which would be really nice to have in the White House.
A stable person, but one that President Trump keeps saying will take the country in a completely different direction, that he will be controlled by the radical left and so on. Trump is trying as well to appeal to a constituency within the Republican base, the suburban women, whose vote he apparently needs, the housewives. He recently tweeted this, in fact. He said, why would suburban women vote for Biden and the Democrats when Democrat-run cities are now rampant with crime and they aren't asking the federal government for help, which could easily spread to the suburbs, and they will reconstitute on steroids their low-income suburbs plan. Will this strategy to scare suburban women and voters in rural areas that have traditionally voted Republican, will it work or will it backfire?
It will work with some people, but I think overall it's going to backfire. I mean, this country had the lowest crime rate, was doing really well until the Trump presidency. And I have to say that when you start trying to stoke people's fears, when you start off by saying all Mexicans are rapists and they're drug dealers, when you demonize everyone who comes from another country, all Muslims are terrorists, that starts to get people scared and believing these kinds of conspiracy theories. So it's going to work for some, but the majority of the American people aren't like that, and they know that's just not true. What we're seeing today, unfortunately, I mean, the peaceful demonstrations are fine. I hold no truck with rioters. They have no place. But it's part of this deep, deep frustration that we have been for so long ignoring the way people of color have been treated by authorities all up and down the line. And I have to do a bow to that, but I don't condone in any way, shape, or form the riots. And unfortunately, they're feeding into Trump's dialogue, but it's not happening all over the country. And the vast majority of those protesters are protesting in good faith, and they're doing it peacefully. And then you get a few instigators, and frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if some of those didn't come from the far right. And in fact, if you look at who's been arrested, it's been people from the far right groups that have been arrested, not the ones that Trump doesn't like on the far left.
Former Governor Christine Whitman, thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
And so far from the positive and uplifting tone he promised, President Trump accepted his party's nomination with a litany of grievances designed to ignite his base. In contrast with the Democratic convention, which brought together divergent political and ideological currents within the party, the Republican convention decided to amplify one singular party line, the Trump line. With so much at stake in this election for the United States, the president has declared prophetically, quote, I'm the only thing standing between the American dream and total anarchy, madness, and chaos, end quote. This variation of after me the floods has become the convention's leitmotif, its platform, the strategy of a party that many view as a vector of an unprecedented American personality cult. The strategy is also a risky one. Rather than seeking to enlarge its electoral base and appeal to independents, the Republican Party has further galvanized already hardened Trump supporters, forgetting a critical point, that if Trump achieved a sweeping Electoral College victory in 2016, it is only thanks to 77,744 votes in 3 swing states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And so, in short, against the backdrop of an economic crisis and a devastating pandemic, the party will have 4 years to find a new balance. That is, if Trump manages to repeat his 2016 feat. If, however, he loses the White House, which could only happen if the election is rigged, Trump asserts, the grand old party would need to reinvent itself. And given the shifting demographics and changing social trends within the US, it is bound to be a long uphill battle. Let us know what you think. But for me, for now, and the entire team here in Washington, thanks for watching.